The sun was setting over the quiet, picturesque suburban neighborhood, casting a warm, golden glow over neatly manicured lawns and tidy homes. The street was calm, a place where families thrived and neighbors greeted each other with friendly smiles. Birds chirped from the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, bringing a sense of peace. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. But today, something felt different. Inside one of the homes, Jason and his wife, Claire, were preparing for a family event, a small gathering to celebrate the pregnancy of their first child. Claire, glowing with the excitement of motherhood, was arranging the table with an assortment of homemade dishes, while Jason adjusted the decorations in the living room. The soft sound of classical music played in the background as they moved about, smiling at each other, caught up in the joy of their growing family. Jason, his hand gently resting on Claire's swollen belly, glanced at her with a look of deep love. "We're really doing this," Jason said, his voice filled with awe as he caressed her belly. "In just a few months, we'll be parents. Can you believe it?" Claire laughed softly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I know. I can't wait for you to meet her. She's going to be perfect." Jason leaned in and kissed her forehead, his smile beaming with pride. The warmth of the moment felt timeless, a perfect picture of domestic happiness. But even as he spoke, the feeling of peace was slowly being replaced by an unsettling tension in the air, though neither of them could yet place its source. Outside, the sound of a car engine broke the silence. The couple glanced out the window, and through the sheer curtains, they spotted Karen, the HOA president, walking toward their front door. Her brisk pace and stiff posture immediately put Jason on alert. It wasn't unusual for Karen to stop by. After all, she had a tendency to enforce HOA rules with an iron fist. But something about today felt different. As Karen reached their doorstep, she didn't knock right away. Instead, she stood there for a moment, glancing around, surveying the property with cold, calculating eyes. Her gaze lingered on the freshly mowed grass, the new paint on the porch, and the wreath on the door, a perfect display of suburban life. Claire, oblivious to Karen's scrutiny, continued setting the table, humming softly as she worked. Jason stood frozen for a moment, his eyes narrowing at Karen through the window. His protective instincts kicked in, but he didn't want to escalate anything before it was necessary. As if sensing his gaze, Karen turned and locked eyes with him. Her lips curled into a tight, thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She gave a curt nod, as if acknowledging his presence but offering no real warmth. It was a smile that sent a chill down Jason's spine. He walked to the door and opened it cautiously, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Karen, is everything all right?" Karen's smile faltered for just a second before she stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. "I need to speak to you about something," she said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled authority. Her eyes flicked past him to Claire, who was still arranging the plates on the table. "You might want to make sure your wife is aware of what's going on." Jason's eyebrows furrowed. "What's going on, Karen?" Karen's gaze flickered toward Claire again, lingering a bit too long on her pregnant belly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment it felt as if she was measuring Claire's very presence in that house. "I'm afraid your property might be in violation of a few HOA rules. You'll need to fix it, or there'll be consequences." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. He could feel the underlying tension in her words, though she hadn't outright said it. "What are you talking about? The house is in perfect condition." Karen crossed her arms over her chest, her stance rigid and almost defensive. "I'll need to speak with you both about it. There are some things I've noticed, and it's best if we take care of them sooner rather than later." Jason stepped aside, his patience wearing thin. "Come inside. Let's talk about this." As she entered the house, Karen's eyes darted from the immaculate furnishings to the small trinkets Claire had carefully chosen. She let out a low sigh. "It's always the little details, isn't it?" Her voice was mocking now, the smile on her face no longer friendly. The shift was subtle, but Jason could feel it. There was something off about the way she was looking at Claire. Claire turned to face her, offering a polite smile, but Karen's eyes flicked down to her belly once more. It was quick, but the disdain in Karen's gaze was unmistakable. The smile she returned to Claire was more of a smirk, cold and unwelcoming. "How far along are you, Claire?" Karen asked, her tone sharp and invasive. "I wouldn't want anything to happen to that precious little one of yours." The words hung in the air like a threat. Claire's smile faltered slightly, but she kept her composure. Jason shot Karen a hard look. "We're fine, Karen. Now, what exactly is the problem?" Jason's voice was firm, but inside, a sense of unease was starting to grow. Karen tilted her head, her gaze now assessing Claire with an almost clinical detachment. "Oh, you'll see," she said cryptically. "You'll see soon enough." In that moment, the tension in the room became palpable, and the warm light from outside seemed to dim just a little. Something terrible was coming, and neither Jason nor Claire knew just how quickly their peaceful world would be shattered. The air inside the house was thick with unease. What had started as a normal afternoon, filled with anticipation for the impending family celebration, had turned into something far darker. Karen was standing in their living room now, her posture stiff and authoritative, casting a shadow over the couple's peaceful life. She had walked in uninvited, her cold eyes scanning every corner of their home as if she were inspecting an apartment, not simply visiting neighbors. Jason could feel the heat rising in his chest, his protective instincts on high alert. His jaw clenched, and though he kept his voice calm, his words were sharp. "What is this all about, Karen?" Karen didn't immediately respond. Instead, she glanced around the room again, her gaze lingering on the pristine furniture, the freshly painted walls. She seemed unimpressed or perhaps irritated. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. "This place," she said, pointing vaguely around the room, "this is a violation of the HOA guidelines, and I'm here to make sure that's rectified." Jason's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? We've been following all the rules. You've even been here before to check in on things." But Karen wasn't listening. She was already on the attack, her tone growing sharper with each word. "Rules, Jason, rules. That's the problem. You think just because you do the minimum, you can skirt around them. You're wrong." Claire, still standing in the kitchen, had been listening to this exchange in growing confusion. She could feel her anxiety creeping up, tightening in her chest. She turned around slowly, her hands still gripping the edges of the counter, trying to maintain composure. She spoke carefully, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "What exactly are we violating, Karen? If there's something we missed, we're happy to address it." Karen's eyes flicked to Claire then, narrowing slightly. "Oh, it's more than just missing something, Claire," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You've let the exterior look run down. Your landscaping is subpar, and that thing you call a garden? It's unacceptable. I'm sure you know this already, but now I'm giving you one final chance to fix it. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to take legal action. I've already contacted my lawyer." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Legal action? The words hung in the air, chilling her. She exchanged a brief glance with Jason, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. All that mattered was this confrontation and the cold, calculating eyes of Karen staring back at them. Jason stepped forward, anger creeping into his voice. "You've been looking for an excuse to tear us down since we moved in, haven't you? You don't like that we've settled here, do you? This neighborhood isn't yours to control. We've done nothing wrong." Karen's lips curled into a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. She took a small step forward, lowering her voice as she spoke. "Oh, you think this is personal, Jason? It's not, but I can see the way you two are. You think you can break the rules and there won't be consequences. Well, I'm the one who enforces those rules. I'm the one who makes sure people like you understand that your behavior won't be tolerated." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He clenched his fists, his muscles tightening in anger. He could feel his temper rising, but he fought to keep it under control. "You're going way too far with this. We haven't done anything wrong. Just leave." Claire stepped forward now, her face pale but determined. Karen, please. We don't want any trouble. We just want to live our lives in peace. Please don't escalate this. But Karen wasn't listening. She had already made up her mind. No, Claire, she snapped, her voice harsh. I'm done with peace. You need to understand that you don't get to play by your own rules here. I've given you enough chances. Jason stepped in front of Claire, his protective instincts fully ignited. You need to leave now. You're not welcome here anymore. His voice was firm, filled with an authority that was foreign to him but necessary in the moment. Karen's eyes flashed with anger at his words. With a sudden and unexpected move, she shoved past him, her shoulder crashing into his chest as she entered the room further, her face a mask of defiance. Jason staggered back, slightly surprised by the force of the push. It wasn't much, just enough to show that Karen wasn't interested in negotiating. This wasn't a simple discussion anymore. It was about dominance. The shift in the room was immediate. Jason's blood ran cold as Karen's actions set off a chain reaction. Claire's eyes widened in shock, her heart racing. Jason's protective instincts kicked into overdrive, and he stepped in front of Claire once again, his arms outstretched to shield her from the woman who seemed bent on causing chaos. Don't ever touch me again, Jason growled, his voice a low warning. His chest was heaving now, anger and fear mixing in his veins. Karen smirked, as if she had already won. Oh, I'm sorry, Jason. Didn't mean to be too rough, she said with a mocking sweetness. But I suppose you don't like that, do you? I'm not here for your apologies. I'm here to make sure you follow the rules that apply to everyone. For a brief moment, Karen's gaze fell to Claire's belly again, her expression darkening just slightly. Jason didn't miss it. He clenched his fists tighter, the sense of dread creeping up his spine, and then, as if on cue, Claire, always the peacemaker, the calm in the storm, turned her back to Karen, walking toward the kitchen counter to gather the remaining dishes. It was a small, seemingly insignificant action, but it opened up the exact opportunity that Karen had been waiting for. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every breath Jason took seemed too loud in his ears. He knew, instinctively, that something was about to happen, something he couldn't control. The world seemed to slow down, each passing second feeling like an eternity. And then it happened. Karen moved quickly, more agile than Jason had expected, and without warning, she made a sharp move toward Claire. Jason's heart skipped a beat as he reached out, but the distance between them was too great. Karen's hand was raised, and for a moment, it seemed as though time itself had frozen. Everything was still, save for the racing of their hearts. Claire's back was turned, and the audience could feel the danger. The world held its breath as Karen stood there, her next move still unknown. Would she strike? Would she finally push Jason over the edge? The answer came, but it wasn't one they were ready for. The suddenness of the moment left Jason in a state of frozen disbelief. The entire room seemed to slow as Karen's hand jerked up, her fingers gripping something cold and metallic. For a split second, it felt like everything had stopped, the world outside, the soft murmur of the distant birds, the ticking of the clock on the wall, all drowned out by the deafening silence that surrounded him. Jason's heart raced in his chest, his breath shallow and erratic. He saw Karen's fingers tighten on the trigger, and in that moment, everything made sense, too much sense. The tension that had been building over the past few weeks, the subtle threats, the cold stares, the passive-aggressive comments. It all came to a crashing point in a single, terrifying instant. Time snapped back into place with an explosion of sound. The deafening crack of the gunshot pierced the air, sharp and jarring. It was the sound of everything breaking, the sound of something irreversible happening. Jason's mind raced, unable to comprehend what was happening, but his body had already reacted before he could process it. Claire didn't even have a chance to scream. The bullet hit her square in the back, just below her shoulder blade, tearing through her flesh with brutal force. The sound of it seemed to reverberate through Jason's bones, and he saw her body jerk forward, her hands clutching her stomach instinctively, as if trying to shield the child growing inside her from harm. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she crumpled to the floor like a rag doll. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he lunged forward, his legs moving before his mind could catch up, desperate to reach her, to stop whatever nightmare was unfolding in front of him. "Claire!" Jason screamed, his voice raw with panic. He reached her in an instant, his hands trembling as he pulled her into his arms. Blood, so much blood, was soaking through her shirt, staining his hands, and her once steady breaths were now shallow and ragged. The world seemed to tilt beneath him, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him like a freight train. Jason's eyes were wide with terror. He could feel the heat of her body, but it was slowly fading, the warmth draining from her as the blood pooled beneath them. His hands moved desperately, pressing against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The fear, the helplessness, the terror, they all fused together in a chaotic swirl of emotions, overwhelming him. "Stay with me, Claire, please," Jason cried, his voice breaking as he pressed harder against her back, his fingers slick with her blood. But no matter how hard he tried, the blood kept coming, the crimson stain spreading over her clothes and into the fabric of his soul. He couldn't bear to lose her like this. Claire's eyes fluttered open briefly, her lips trembling as she looked up at him. "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, shoo," Jason urged, his voice thick with emotion. No, don't apologize. You're going to be okay. Please stay with me." He tried to keep his voice steady, but it cracked on the last word, the raw pain in his chest making it almost impossible to breathe. Karen, who had been standing back, frozen in the moment of her attack, suddenly moved with alarming speed. She turned and rushed to the phone on the wall, picking it up without hesitation. Jason's eyes, still locked on Claire, caught the movement just in time to see her dialing the police. 911, what's your emergency? Came the cold, detached voice of the operator. Karen's voice was calm, too calm, considering the situation. "I've been attacked by a pregnant woman," she said, the words dripping with practiced sincerity. "She lunged at me, and I had no choice but to defend myself. She's on the floor now, bleeding. I need the police here immediately." Her tone was controlled, rehearsed, and entirely self-serving. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief, his stomach twisting in agony. He wanted to shout at her, to tell her that she was lying, that she was the one who had shot Claire, that she was the attacker. But his voice wouldn't come. He couldn't find the words, couldn't summon the energy, not while Claire was dying in his arms. As Karen hung up the phone, she turned toward them, her lips curling into a cruel smile. She seemed almost pleased with herself, like she had just orchestrated some grand performance that was going exactly as planned. Jason could feel the rage building in him, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming fear for Claire. He couldn't focus on Karen. He couldn't focus on anything except her, the woman he loved, the mother of their child, lying there, slipping away. He bent down, pressing his forehead against hers, his tears mingling with the blood on her face. "Please, Claire," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You have to make it. You have to stay with me." Claire's breathing was shallow, each inhale weaker than the last. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Jason could only hold her tighter, feeling the life draining out of her with each passing second. He closed his eyes, his mind spiraling as he tried to push away the suffocating terror that threatened to consume him. In a moment of despair, a flash of memory cut through the fog. He saw Claire standing in the kitchen, just days before, laughing as she placed a picture frame on the counter. He remembered her voice, soft and comforting, telling him how excited she was to bring their baby into the world. The image was so vivid, so real, it felt like it had just happened moments ago. But now everything had changed. Jason's mind reeled, spinning as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The house that had been filled with love and anticipation was now tainted by blood and violence. The woman he had promised to protect was lying in his arms, fighting to stay alive. Claire's eyes fluttered again, her gaze meeting his with a faint pained smile. "I love you," she managed to whisper, the words barely audible, but Jason heard them like a thunderclap in the silence. I love you too, Claire, he said, choking on the words as he tried to keep it together. I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever. The sound of approaching sirens echoed in the distance, but it felt like an eternity before they would reach them. Jason continued to hold Claire, trying to stop the blood, trying to will her to stay with him. But with each second that passed, it seemed like the light in her eyes dimmed a little more. Jason's heart raced in his chest, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't keep the panic at bay. Every time Claire's breathing faltered, every time her body trembled in his arms, the fear crept deeper into his bones. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't lose their baby. The sound of the police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Jason's eyes flickered to the door, his heart pounding as he held Claire close. Her breathing was becoming shallower by the second, and the pool of blood surrounding her seemed to grow with every movement, every breath that passed between them. But the police were coming. The truth would be revealed. The chaos of the moment, the overwhelming dread that had taken over the house, would soon shift into something more calculated. Justice would begin to unfold, or so Jason thought. When Officer Davis finally entered the house, his face was a mask of professionalism. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the panic that had gripped the entire scene. Behind him, two more officers followed, their eyes scanning the room, quickly taking in the chaos. Jason's frantic eyes locked onto Davis, the officer's presence a fleeting promise of help, but also a reminder that everything was now out of his hands. "Sir," Officer Davis said, his voice deep and steady, "I need to know what happened here." Jason, still kneeling on the floor beside Claire, could barely form the words. His hands were slick with her blood, his chest heaving as he tried to keep it together. She was shot. Karen, she shot my wife." His voice cracked as the weight of the reality hit him all over again. Claire's body was still warm in his arms, but her eyes were barely open now, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. Jason could feel her slipping away, the fear of losing her escalating with each passing second. But even as he tried to keep his focus on her, the investigation was beginning to unfold around him. Karen was standing off to the side, her arms crossed, her expression cool and composed. She glanced at the officers, then at Jason, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips, but there was something unsettling about it. A quiet smugness that made Jason's blood boil. She had just shot Claire in cold blood, and here she was, standing like an innocent bystander, acting as though she hadn't just shattered their lives. Officer Davis turned his attention to Karen, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ma'am, you need to tell me what happened here," he said, his tone firm but not accusatory. Karen's eyes flicked over to Jason briefly, then back to the officer. "I was just defending myself," she said smoothly, her voice calm, almost too calm. "This woman," she nodded at Claire, "lunged at me. I had no choice. She was threatening me, so I had to protect myself." The words fell from her lips like a rehearsed script, and Jason's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream at her, to expose her lies, but he couldn't. He couldn't do anything except watch as she twisted the story to suit her narrative. The officer seemed to buy her explanation at first. He asked her to elaborate, and Karen, with practiced ease, described the confrontation that had allegedly occurred, how Claire had rushed at her in a fit of rage, and how she had acted in self-defense by drawing her weapon. Karen even went as far as to describe how Claire had threatened her life, but Jason could see through it all. It was a lie. He knew it. Claire was pregnant, for God's sake. How could she have lunged at Karen? How could any of this be true? Jason's throat tightened. He couldn't let this happen. He had to stop this woman from walking away free, from turning everything upside down, and making Claire's suffering into some twisted justification for her actions. As Karen finished her account, Officer Davis nodded thoughtfully, taking notes. "Thank you, ma'am. We'll need to verify the details, but I'll be back to speak with you in a moment." Jason could barely keep himself from shaking as he looked up at Davis. His eyes were pleading. "Please," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation, "she's lying. You have to believe me. Karen shot her. She shot my wife. Claire never lunged at her. She's twisting the truth." Officer Davis's gaze softened for a moment, and for just an instant, Jason felt a flicker of hope. But then the officer's expression hardened again, and he turned his focus back to the room. "We'll get to the bottom of this, sir. I need you to stay calm and let us do our job," Davis said, his voice colder now, more impersonal. Jason wanted to scream. Calm? How could he be calm when his wife was dying in his arms? How could he be calm when the woman who had put her in that position was standing there, trying to act like she was the victim? But the officer had already turned away, and there was nothing Jason could do but nod helplessly, the weight of his fear pressing down on him like an unbearable burden. As Davis moved toward the kitchen to take in the scene, Karen was left standing in the corner, her lips curling into a self-satisfied smirk as she glanced back at Jason. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if daring him to challenge her story. Jason's blood boiled, but he could do nothing but watch as the officer spoke with his colleagues, inspecting the scene. It wasn't long before Davis returned to speak with Jason. "We've spoken with Karen, and we're looking into the details. We'll also need to ask you a few more questions," Davis said, his eyes searching Jason's face. Jason nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "What else is there to say? She shot my wife, and now you're questioning me?" Davis held up a hand, his expression sympathetic, but still professional. "We need to hear both sides of the story, sir. You understand how this works. The evidence will tell us everything we need to know. We'll be in touch." But as the officer walked away, Jason's mind raced. Something didn't feel right. The situation was escalating in ways he couldn't predict, and Karen was getting away with it. Was there a way to prove she was lying? Was there any hope of exposing her for what she truly was before it was too late? Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Officer Davis, still moving around the house, approached the area near where Karen had claimed the confrontation had taken place. There, just beneath the edge of a rug, the officer noticed something small but important. A shell casing. It was a small, nearly invisible object, but it was enough to shift the entire investigation. The casing was lodged under the rug, hidden from plain sight. Davis bent down, lifting the rug carefully. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain this," he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. Karen froze, her face going pale as she looked at the casing. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since she had entered the house, there was no smug smile, no calculated confidence. Instead, there was only a flicker of panic, a crack in her armor. What's this?" Karen stammered, her voice betraying her usual calm demeanor. Officer Davis's eyes were sharp. "You said you fired in self-defense, correct?" He turned the casing over with his fingers, examining it. "Then why is it lodged under a rug, hidden away from where you claim the shot took place? The angle doesn't add up either. Your version of events doesn't make sense, Karen." A cold silence fell over the room as everyone absorbed the significance of the find. The lie that Karen had spun so carefully was beginning to unravel. She tried to keep her composure, but the smirk had long since vanished, replaced by nervous sweat and an underlying terror that now leaked through her false exterior. She stammered again, her words failing to form as the officers closed in. Jason watched, his chest tightening with a mix of relief and frustration. This was it. The truth was coming out, but at what cost? Before anyone could move, Karen bolted toward the door. The suddenness of her actions took everyone by surprise. But before she could escape, Officer Davis and his team reacted swiftly. They grabbed her, holding her back as she struggled, her face twisted in panic. Jason's heart raced as he watched the confrontation unfold. Was this it? Was Karen finally being held accountable? The suspense lingered in the air, thick and oppressive, as the officers restrained her and read her rights. The truth was finally coming to light, but the cost was still too high, and Jason wasn't sure how this would all end. As Karen was led away in cuffs, Jason collapsed back onto the floor beside Claire. He wasn't sure if he was relieved or terrified. The investigation was still unfolding, and the truth was finally being exposed, but nothing could change the reality of what had happened. Nothing could change the pain of seeing his wife slip away in his arms. And now, with Karen in custody, the journey toward justice was just beginning. The days following Karen's arrest were filled with a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and constant pressure. The house, once a home filled with hope for the future, now felt like a prison, a place haunted by the echoes of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Jason found himself living in a fog, caught between the growing weight of his emotions and the mounting pressure of an ever-evolving nightmare. Each day, he watched his wife, Claire, struggle to survive. Every moment of her fragile existence was a reminder of the violence that had been inflicted upon her, and every hour brought with it new threats, more lies, more manipulations from the woman who had nearly destroyed everything Jason held dear. Karen's desperation, the legal battle had barely begun when Karen unleashed her next weapon. An expensive lawyer who immediately began attacking Jason's credibility, portraying him as an angry, unhinged man prone to violent outbursts. The lawyer, Eric Preston, was a smooth-talking, well-dressed man with a reputation for making cases disappear, for turning the most unfathomable lies into truths. He began by filing a motion to have the charges against Karen reduced, claiming that she had acted in self-defense, as she had originally stated. His defense was methodical, precise, and full of holes that he worked tirelessly to cover up. Jason could feel the pressure mounting as Preston's slick words spread throughout the legal system, poisoning the well of justice. The lies Karen had told about Claire lunging at her were given new life under the careful and manipulative guidance of Preston. He painted Karen as the victim, even going so far as to claim that she had been acting under duress, an innocent woman protecting herself from an unprovoked attack by a violent and unstable pregnant woman. The absurdity of it was sickening, but the legal system had its own way of twisting the truth. Preston used Jason's own emotions against him, digging up every personal detail about his past, every argument, every moment of weakness, every flaw he had ever had, and turning them into ammunition. It didn't matter that he had never been violent with Claire, that he had always been a loving and supportive husband. In the courtroom, he was made to look like a man on the edge, a man whose actions led to the tragedy. But it wasn't just the courtroom where Karen's influence began to spread. Jason's own life outside of the trial started to crumble under the weight of her manipulations. With her legal team working overtime to discredit him, Karen also began to leak fabricated stories to the press. Soon, the public was buzzing with headlines like "Pregnant Woman Shot in Cold Blood by Neighbor" and "Violent Husband Claims Self-Defense in Shooting of Pregnant Wife." The narrative shifted, and the world that Jason had once felt in control of was slipping through his fingers. It wasn't just the attack on his reputation that stung, it was the complete lack of care for the damage Karen was doing to Claire. Claire was still in the hospital, fighting for her life, and yet Karen's lawyer was out there, undermining everything Jason had tried to protect. Karen was using the law as a weapon, and Jason had no idea how to fight back. Each press conference, each courtroom motion felt like a slap in the face. The more Karen manipulated the system, the more Jason's frustration built. He couldn't let her get away with it. He couldn't let her win. He had to protect Claire. But every move Karen made seemed to push him farther into a corner. Jason's frustration was palpable, his mind consumed by thoughts of Claire, the legal battle, and the endless cycle of threats that seemed to follow them at every turn. He had never imagined that something as mundane as a neighborhood dispute could escalate into a life-or-death struggle for his family. But now, here he was, fighting for his wife's survival, fighting for his own survival, and trying to stay sane in the midst of it all. The trauma of the attack was a constant companion. Claire's fragile state, the physical and emotional scars she carried, was a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Every day, Jason sat at her side in the hospital, watching as she fought to regain her strength. The doctors had told him that the bullet had grazed her spine, leaving her with temporary paralysis in her legs. But they weren't sure how much permanent damage had been done. There was still hope, still a chance that Claire could recover, but the uncertainty was unbearable. Jason had never felt more helpless in his life. He could sit by her bedside, hold her hand, and reassure her that everything would be okay. But none of that could take away the pain she was in. He couldn't fix her. He couldn't make it all go away. And as Claire lay unconscious for hours, Jason couldn't help but wonder if it had all been his fault. If he hadn't let Karen into their home, if he had just stood up to her sooner, would Claire still be here? Would they still be the family they once were? But there was no time to dwell on that. The moment Claire was stable enough to move, Jason knew they would be dragged into the next phase of the nightmare, the court case. He had to prepare, but how could he focus on the legalities of everything when his world felt like it was crumbling? Every day, he was faced with new obstacles. The police officers who had initially believed him were growing more skeptical as Karen's lawyer worked behind the scenes to sway their opinions. The media coverage was constant, invasive, and degrading. Every time Jason left the hospital, he was hounded by reporters, their cameras flashing, their questions biting. Jason tried to stay calm, to focus on Claire's recovery, but it was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Karen's face, the smug look she had worn when the authorities first arrived. She hadn't even looked guilty. She hadn't even been afraid. No. Karen had known that she was going to get away with it, that she was going to twist the narrative and turn Jason into the villain. At times, Jason felt like he was losing his mind. The weight of the emotional toll, the pressure of the legal system, and the fear of losing Claire were slowly crushing him. He had always prided himself on being strong, on being the protector of his family. But now, with every new lie, every new threat from Karen's side, he found himself questioning everything. How far would she go to destroy them? How far would her power stretch before it suffocated everything they had left? Emotional conflict, Jason's internal conflict, was beginning to tear him apart. He was a man caught between two worlds. The world of loyalty and love for his wife, and the world of terror and uncertainty that Karen had dragged him into. Every day, he battled with the emotions swirling inside him. The part of him that wanted to stay calm for Claire, the part that wanted to be her rock, was at constant odds with the part of him that burned with rage. How could he not be angry? How could he sit idly by while Karen systematically destroyed everything they had? But then, every time he thought about losing Claire, about the devastating toll the shooting had taken on her, the anger turned to grief. He didn't want to become the man he feared he might be, someone so consumed by rage and frustration that he lost sight of everything that mattered. The hospital room was suffocating. Claire was so fragile, her once bright eyes now clouded with uncertainty and pain. She had always been the light of Jason's world, the person who held them together. But now, it felt like the roles had reversed. Claire was the one struggling to hold on, and Jason was the one who had to carry the weight of it all. Every night, he lay awake next to her, his thoughts racing as he tried to find a way out of this madness. The emotional toll was overwhelming, and the more Karen twisted the situation, the more Jason felt like he was losing control. His emotions were raw, exposed, and it took everything he had to keep his composure in front of Claire. She needed him to be strong, to help her recover. But how could he be strong when every breath he took felt like it was a step closer to breaking? There were moments when Jason thought about giving up, when he thought about walking away from it all and leaving the fight behind. But each time he thought about that, he remembered Claire's face, her smile, the way she had looked at him before all of this. How could he walk away from her now? How could he leave her to face this nightmare alone? He couldn't. He wouldn't. As the days dragged on, Jason realized that the only way to survive this was to stay focused. He had to fight, both for Claire's life and for their future. He couldn't let Karen win. He couldn't let her destroy everything they had worked so hard for. But deep down, Jason knew the fight was far from over. The war had just begun, and with Karen's grip tightening around their lives, he had to find a way to break free before it was too late. The day of the trial had arrived, and with it, the weight of every decision, every moment of pain, every tear shed, and every lie told was about to come crashing down in a single pivotal confrontation. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Outside, the sun beat down, casting a relentless glow over the proceedings, but inside, it felt as though the walls themselves were closing in on Jason and Claire. Their hearts pounded in their chests, the uncertainty of the outcome hanging like a storm cloud, ready to break. Jason sat beside Claire, their hands clasped tightly together. It had been weeks since Claire had been shot, weeks since the world they had known had been shattered. She had spent days in a coma, her body struggling to recover, but now, with the trial beginning, she was finally awake, finally able to face the woman who had nearly ended her life. The emotional toll of the entire ordeal was written in the lines on her face, the lingering pain in her eyes. She still couldn't walk, the bullet that had torn through her back, leaving her with permanent damage. But she was here. She was alive, and she wasn't going to let Karen get away with it. Karen sat across the room, her face the picture of composure, her expression cold and calculating. Her lawyer, Eric Preston, stood beside her, the sharp lines of his suit reflecting the calculated nature of the defense he was mounting. He was a smooth talker, a master manipulator, and the public had been eating up every word of his. But Jason had seen through it all. He knew the truth, and now, with Claire by his side, he was ready to make sure that the truth came to light once and for all. The courtroom drama, the trial, began with all the usual formalities. Jason was sworn in, his testimony was recorded, and then Karen's lawyer began his well-practiced questioning. Preston painted Karen as the innocent woman, trapped in a terrifying situation, forced to defend herself against a violent, unprovoked attack. The courtroom murmured with disbelief as he described how Claire had supposedly lunged at Karen, trying to attack her in a fit of rage. The defense was airtight, polished, and professional. But as Jason listened, his blood boiled. He could see the lies being carefully spun, the fabrications woven with precision. "Mr. Brown," Preston's voice cut through the tension, "you claim that Karen shot your wife in cold blood, but we have evidence suggesting otherwise. We have the statement of the defendant, Karen, who clearly states that she was in fear for her life. Can you dispute that?" Jason's fists clenched beneath the table. The audacity of it all. Karen's lie, her twisted manipulation of the truth, was being presented as fact, and the world was buying into it. Jason glanced at Claire, her pale face steely with determination. Her grip on his hand tightened, and he knew that she was just as ready to fight as he was. This was their moment, the moment they would expose Karen for who she truly was. But the truth was hidden beneath layers of deception, and only the right evidence could peel those layers away. Karen's breakdown, just as Preston was about to continue his questioning, Claire stood up. Her voice was low but steady as she addressed the judge, her gaze fixed firmly on Karen. She had to speak, had to reclaim her story before it was buried forever. Her legs were still weak, but she moved with a quiet grace, her determination clear. The entire courtroom went silent as Claire's voice rang out, strong and unyielding. "Your Honor," Claire began, her eyes never leaving Karen, "I was never violent. I never lunged at her. I did nothing but try to live my life with my husband and my child." Claire's voice faltered for a moment, but she regained her composure. "She shot me, and she's trying to lie her way out of it." There was a ripple through the room, a murmur of disbelief. Everyone had seen Karen's carefully rehearsed story, but here was Claire, alive, speaking her truth, and refusing to let Karen's lies stand. Claire continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "She never once cared about my life or the life of my unborn child. She cared only about power, about control. She manipulated everyone around her, and I almost died because of it." It was then that Jason stood up, the adrenaline coursing through him. "Karen shot my wife in cold blood. You all need to understand something. She's not the victim here. She is the aggressor. And I will do everything I can to make sure she faces the consequences." But even as he spoke, the tension in the room reached its peak. Karen's face had turned an unnatural shade of white, her eyes darting back and forth between Claire, Jason, and the judge. For the first time since the trial had begun, her composure began to crack. The woman who had stood confidently at the front of the room, acting as though she were above the law, now looked as though she was trapped, the walls closing in on her. "That's not true," Karen whispered, her voice shaking with panic. "That's not how it happened. I I was just trying to protect myself. I didn't mean to," but Karen's voice trailed off as the prosecutor, Detective Harris, who had been quietly analyzing the evidence, stood up. He held in his hands the key piece of evidence that would unravel Karen's entire defense. The courtroom went silent once again as Harris approached the bench, holding up a small piece of surveillance footage from the security cameras of a neighbor's house. This footage, Harris began, was taken moments before the shooting occurred. It shows Karen's movements in the front yard, her demeanor. Watch closely. The footage played in the courtroom, and the eyes of everyone in the room were glued to the screen. It was a clear shot of Karen walking toward Jason and Claire's house, a gun in her hand, her posture rigid with purpose. But what shocked everyone, what brought the entire room to a standstill, was the moment just before the shot was fired. Karen had stopped. She looked directly at the camera, her expression twisted in anger, and then she raised the gun. There was no defense, no self-preservation. She pulled the trigger with cold, deliberate intent. She shot Claire in cold blood. "Your Honor," Detective Harris said, his voice unwavering. The footage speaks for itself. For the first time in the trial, Karen's face contorted with fear, the facade she had so carefully crafted crumbling before her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The room was electric with disbelief as the truth finally came to light. Karen had lied. She had manipulated the system. And now, the evidence was irrefutable. Claire's recovery as the trial continued and the evidence piled up against Karen, something remarkable happened. Claire, who had been so frail just days before, her body weakened by the shooting and the long hospital stay, began to show signs of recovery. Her physical condition was still delicate, and her ability to walk was limited, but her strength, her emotional strength, had grown exponentially. Throughout the trial, she had found something inside herself that Jason hadn't realized was there. She had always been strong, but now, in the face of everything she had been through, she became something more. She became the symbol of resilience, of refusing to let anyone define her story. As Karen's lies continued to fall apart, Claire's truth became more powerful than ever. Jason had always admired her strength, but now he saw her in a new light. She was not just his wife, the woman he loved. She was a fighter, someone who had survived the worst and was determined to get justice no matter the cost, and that strength radiated throughout the courtroom, filling the room with an undeniable energy. Every word she spoke, every tear she shed, was a testament to her courage. The final showdown, as the final moments of the trial approached, Karen's lawyer, Eric Preston, tried desperately to salvage what was left of his client's case. But it was clear that the battle had already been won. The evidence was too strong, Claire's testimony was too powerful, and Karen's lies were no longer convincing anyone. The final blow came when Preston, desperate and rattled, accused Jason of manipulating the trial, of trying to frame Karen for something she didn't do. But it was too late. The truth had already triumphed. Karen was arrested in the courtroom, her face pale, and her hands shaking as the handcuffs were placed on her wrists. The room erupted in chaos, the atmosphere thick with the triumph of justice finally being served. Karen's carefully constructed world had come crashing down, and she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. As Karen was led out of the courtroom, her eyes locked onto Jason's. There was no smugness, no pride left in her gaze, only pure hatred, a burning desire for revenge. But Jason didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He had won. And more importantly, Claire had won. Their future was no longer under Karen's control. The months that followed the trial were both a time of healing and reflection for Jason and Claire. They had come through a storm, battered but not broken, and now, finally, they were beginning to rebuild their lives, slowly but surely. The scars from the shooting were still visible, both physical and emotional, but Every day they woke up together was a victory. Claire's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The doctors had been cautious with their optimism, but Claire had defied the odds. Her strength was more than just physical, it was an inner fire, a determination to regain control of her life that had been taken from her in the cruelest of ways. She still couldn't walk without assistance, and her body was riddled with the marks of the trauma she had endured, but her spirit was unyielding. Every day she spent in rehabilitation was a step forward, and Jason could see her growing stronger, more confident. Jason, too, had found his way back. The weight of the trial had taken a toll on him, on his sanity, on his ability to keep it together. He had questioned everything, his choices, his role in Claire's suffering, whether he had done enough to protect her. But as he watched Claire take each step toward healing, he began to find peace in the process. He knew he had done everything he could. Together, they had fought to survive. And now, they were reclaiming their lives bit by bit. The day Karen was sentenced to prison, Jason and Claire stood side by side in the courtroom, their hands clasped tightly together. The judge's words were a formality. Everyone knew what had to happen. Karen had been convicted, and she was going to prison for what she had done. But as the sentence was handed down, Jason couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. The justice that had so often seemed out of reach was finally within their grasp. Karen would face the consequences of her actions, and the grip she had on their lives was now gone. The emotional weight of it all hit them in waves. When the gavel came down, Claire leaned against Jason, her body trembling with emotion. It wasn't just about the conviction, it was about everything they had been through. The lies, the fear, the loss, it had all been a long, hard road. But now, as the courtroom began to clear, there was a sense of finality. They were free. Outside the courthouse, the world felt different. It wasn't the same world they had entered when this nightmare had started. The weight of Karen's manipulation, the false accusations, the media circus, it was all behind them. They could finally breathe again. As they walked down the steps, Claire looked up at Jason, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. "We did it," she whispered, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We really did it." Jason squeezed her hand, his own smile breaking through the exhaustion. "We did, Claire. We fought for each other and we won. We're free now." But even as the victory settled in, there was an underlying sense of unease that neither of them could shake. There had been something unsettling about Karen's final moments in the courtroom. Her cold, calculating eyes as she had been led away in handcuffs, they hadn't been filled with the remorse Jason had hoped for. No, there had been something else there, something darker. A look that said the battle was over, but the war was far from won. Justice served. But not the end. As Jason and Claire returned to their home, they began the quiet process of settling back into their routine. The noise of the world outside, of the media, of the judgment, of the echoes of the trial began to fade. It was just the two of them now, trying to find a way forward. But even as they made progress, they knew the scars would never fully fade. The memory of the shooting, of Karen's manipulation, of everything they had lost, it would always be with them. But it would no longer define them. They had survived, and together they would rebuild. Jason often sat by Claire's side, watching her as she regained her strength. He marveled at the resilience in her eyes, the way she never gave up, the way she fought back even when the world seemed to push her down. Claire had become not just the love of his life, but a symbol of survival. And in return, Jason had become the protector she had always needed him to be, someone who would stand by her side no matter what. As for Karen, her fate had been sealed. But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story, more to the tangled web of the HOA and the sinister grip it had over their lives. There were too many unanswered questions. How had Karen been able to manipulate the system so effectively? What had driven her to such extremes? And then one evening, as Jason was scrolling through the news, he found something that made his blood run cold. A report had surfaced, a whisper of a larger conspiracy involving the HOA, a network of corruption that ran far deeper than they had realized. Karen's actions, it seemed, had been part of something much bigger. There were rumors of more people involved, more powerful figures pulling strings behind the scenes. The HOA's grip on the community was more than just a personal vendetta, it was part of a larger scheme to control and manipulate. Jason's gut twisted with a mix of anger and dread. He had thought the fight was over. But this new revelation hinted at a much darker reality, one that Jason wasn't sure they were ready to face. As Claire sat beside him, her eyes filled with concern, Jason knew one thing for certain. The victory they had won today wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Karen might be behind bars, but the seeds of the corruption that had taken root in their lives had not been eradicated. There was still more to uncover, more to fight for, and more that would need to be brought to light. Jason turned to Claire, his expression determined. "This isn't over," he said softly. "Not by a long shot." Claire nodded, her eyes steady, filled with a resolve that matched his own. "We'll face it together," she said, her voice unwavering. And with that, they both knew the truth. This was just the beginning of a new battle. But whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything before, together, stronger than ever. And they would never stop fighting for the life they had fought so hard to build. But one thing remained clear: they were no longer victims. They were survivors. And now, they were ready to take on whatever came next. Don't miss out on the next chapter of this gripping saga. Hit that subscribe button now and turn on the notifications so you never miss a moment of the intense twists and turns. The HOA Stories is just getting started, and you won't miss what's coming next. Join us and be part of the story. The fight for justice is far from over.